All right, so Akiem Hicks is a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. A bit of a surprise. Akiem Hicks is someone who, in 2018, was maybe the best interior defensive lineman in football. Has not been as good these past several years, but a big chunk of that has been through injury. He played under 200 snaps in 2019. He still played over 800 snaps in 2020, and maybe had his worst year out of three in that year in terms of statistics. And then in 2021, only about 300 snaps. So there's going to be a question of what are we getting with Akiem Hicks? There certainly is a high upside with him. Even if you look at his PFF grades game by game last year, he had a couple where he was awesome. Against Minnesota, grade over 90. Against Cincinnati, a grade over 80. But then there's a lot of 60s in there. So are you getting a consistent player with him? I'm not so sure about that, and you are spending $10 million to do so. If you look at a PFF WAR metric, the past couple of years, I think it's fair to guess that he might give you a tenth of a win above replacement level, which wouldn't be spectacular. That's not something you would want to spend $10 million on necessarily. That would definitely be a high price. Although one thing I always kind of do maintain is I'd rather overpay than not pay anybody. We're going all in for this year, so getting a player who can play, I'm not as concerned about it. I think you probably could have spent that money better, but this is also an area of weakness for Tampa Bay, so I get why they're doing it, and it's something that they value. I mean, listen, Akiem Hicks next to Vita Vea, if Hicks is on, seems terrifying. They also drafted Logan Hall, not in the first round, but with the first pick of the second round in their first selection. So clearly they're trying to bolster that interior defensive line. They're moving on from Sue, which is the correct decision to do, I think. Again, if you want to compare PFF grade numbers, Hicks have been better in the past 3 years than Sue, especially last year. Sue was not fantastic in that category. And again, next to Vita Vea, anyone is going to get some pressures and things like that. But as a whole, upgrading there is definitely a smart decision. And they got a younger guy and kind of an older guy, and we'll see how well it works. So that alone is very fascinating to me. For a lot of people saying, how can Tampa Bay keep doing this? Isn't their cap situation terrible? Well, again, the cap it's not that it doesn't exist, it's that it doesn't really exist. I think is the fair, paying attention to the cap does not matter as much as paying attention to how much teams have spent in terms of actual cash. That's always been the better metric. And if you look at that, Tampa Bay, actually, this move jumps them from 7th most in terms of actual cash spent to 5th most in terms of actual cash spent. You're still behind the Jaguars, Saints, Bills, and Browns. So there still is some, again, maybe they could even spend more. I don't know. A lot of times it's less about how much money or how much cap space do you have, and it's more about how much money do you actually have to spend. That tends to be the better indicator of how much teams can spend. So there's that. Again, as a Buccaneers fan, would I rather have Hicks or Odell Beckham Jr.? Probably Odell Beckham Jr., but maybe they're still going to go out and spend something like that. I would imagine not. I think this is probably it. But again, it is a bit of a low-risk move. This is a 1-year deal. So 1 year, and it's also worth mentioning, I'm saying $10 million, it's worth up to $10 million. So there's incentives involved, and maybe some of those incentives are just how many snaps do you get and things like that. So because of that, this could potentially mean that, we might see him trying to get more playing time, which could be a good thing and is something where I could certainly see something like that happen. So that's where all these contracts always get weird, right? When there's incentives involved and everything like that. As a whole, though, I mean, listen, Todd Bowles values stopping the run. That's something that we know about him. And quite frankly, with Vita Vea in the middle, no matter who you have, he is going to be able to, help you out a lot. And with someone like Hicks, maybe this could be something that, could we see Hicks get some pressures? Could we see Hicks get some pass rush stuff going? That could be very fascinating, which isn't necessarily how I've ever viewed Akiem Hicks, really. He's always been more of a run stopper than a pass rusher, and maybe that's the logic is, hey, we just drafted a good pass rushing interior defensive lineman with Logan Hall. Let's now have Hicks be the run stopper, which could be the factor. Another thing that I did think about is I was initially a little surprised that this is where they went after the depth if they're going to spend $10 million on a player. Why not maybe an edge rusher? And a reason for that is I don't know if there's an edge rusher like this available necessarily, so that might be part of it. But one thing that I certainly thought of about this is, does this mean that Logan Hall could get some time as an edge rusher? Which on the record, do not like that idea. I think Logan Hall got his best work done as an interior defensive lineman. You have him as a 3-4 defensive end. That works with him. But maybe that's what they're going to do, or maybe they're going to try it out. Maybe they want to have several different options, or maybe they just like Akiem Hicks. Like, that's the other option, is maybe they just think that, like, he's the best available player, which, again, if you're going to sign somebody, like, he's probably the best guy who is still available, I would think. Like, there's probably, I don't know who else you would go after. I'm just looking at the list right now, and I don't really think, like, no one who's really jumping out at me necessarily that I'm like, oh, I would have rather had that guy than Akiem Hicks. So if they felt like they needed a defensive lineman and they didn't want to trade for someone, well, here you go. Here's a guy who you can get. So I think that's definitely another interesting thing. And there's certainly high upside with Akiem Hicks. There certainly is. And let's be honest, we know how Tampa Bay loves to go after their veterans. That's what they've been doing these past few years, is they've gone after guys who are big names who maybe don't have the most success recently. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Richard Sherman didn't work out the way they wanted to. He got banged up, wasn't able to do too much. Sometimes it really works out. Shout out Tom Brady, right? So there's definitely obvious positives and negatives. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense is actually a little bit underrated. I think that it was pretty good last year, and Todd Bowles did a great job of scheming guys in good positions to where they could still play well. You know, their entire secondary got hurt last year, so obviously that's going to make them look worse at times, but when they were healthy, I mean, I thought that they still played pretty well. Vita Vea has a huge impact. The linebackers obviously have a huge impact, and kind of one of the areas that they could potentially, be, I think their biggest area of weakness was defensive line, and defensive line depth especially. Because again, you have Shaq Barrett on the edge, and you have Joe Tryon, who you just drafted last year with pick 32. I don't know, they don't have a ton of depth there. Could use an extra edge guy, but then for the defensive line, it's like, okay, well, you have Will Goldson, who's certainly very good. You drafted Logan Hall. You have Vita Vea. I don't know if you needed an extra guy, but this might also be kind of a good signing then, if you think about it from that perspective. Either he, gets hurt or just doesn't play well, and you're okay because you don't need him. You're not relying on him. But if he ends up coming in and being awesome, well, now you have an extra option, and he could be great, and that could help propel you to having a good defense, which you could use if you're trying to win another Super Bowl. So from that perspective, I like it. And again, if you have a position that's kind of a bit of a weakness, it always helps to just have extra guys there. So it's a bit interesting. Again, maybe not the exact move I would have made personally. I think there could be some other guys that I like a little bit more, but when we're dealing with this, when we're a day away from being in June, there's just not that many great free agents left, so kind of got to get what you can get. And I think Akiem Hicks should be someone who, I think he'll. There's a better chance of this working out than not working out, is kind of my main thought on this. So that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. What are your thoughts on Akiem Hicks to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.